I want to talk about something that you actually brought up on the last episode. Do you remember you talking about overlaying two maps? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember in my Google Chrome browser, I had a bunch of tabs open, and I meant to find the heart disease and obesity chart, and I couldn't find it. And I kept clicking on these different tabs, and I thought, okay, well, okay, there's the obesity. Where's the heart disease? And I figured, and I realized, I had it. They just looked identical.
Yeah, and I decided I wanted to look a little deeper at that. And I found some additional content that I think is going to be really interesting, and I'm ready to kick it off if you are.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
You're listening to It Might Be Interesting with your hosts, Josh Levy
and John Walsh.
Now, there's an endless amount of information out there on any given topic.
And sometimes you just need somebody who can extrapolate it in a way that might be interesting. So the heart disease map that we were looking at, it kind of reminded me of somebody being like if America was shot in the belly. The belly would be right on the border of Alabama and Mississippi. That is where you see the highest concentration of heart disease. Well, I started looking at various other maps and found, and you have to understand, it kind of bleeds out from there.
Right.
So it goes all the way up to the Great Lakes area. It goes kind of to the southern border of Pennsylvania, and then it kind of skips over the northeast and then hits Maine. So the splattering effect of this, you see kind of in the very northern part of Maine, and then you see all from the Great Lakes down through Texas, Oklahoma, and so on. Mm-hmm. And that's the heart disease map. So I went and I overlaid it to the obesity one like you were talking about, and I found pretty much the same thing. But then I went and I looked at a few other ones. So I've got them in the shared drive there, and you could tell when you look at strokes in the United States, it's identical to the heart disease one because it's pretty much the same disease, right?
Right.
A blockage in an artery that goes to your heart, you have a heart attack. One that's in an artery that goes to your brain, you have a stroke. But it's in direct correlation, and you see, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Tennessee, so forth and so on, all the way up to the Great Lakes area, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana. And then it goes eastward towards the Carolinas and so on. But it's just kind of a splattering, and then it sort of jumps over the Northeast and hits Maine again. It's exactly the same. And then I went and I looked at diabetes. Mm-hmm. And you see the exact same trend from about, Oklahoma, Texas, all the way up to southern Pennsylvania and the Great Lakes. And then once again, it jumps over New England and hits the northern part of Maine. And then I looked at cancer rates, and we see, those same states are affected. Yeah. And then lastly, what I looked at, I was looking for a correlation just on diet or on sugar intake or whatever. And what I found was the states with the most amount of fast food joints per capita are also mirrored to that trend.
So, and one thing I liked about this chart, and you find in this is, folks, this is not about look at these red states versus these blue states.
Right.
Like Wyoming, Montana, Utah, those are definitely not blue, liberal, tree-hugging, hippie states.
Right.
But they mirror the same, health ratings in all those categories as the liberal, tree-hugging, hippie states. So this literally has nothing to do with...
It's very regional. It's not political data.
Right,
It is
right.
just health data that is compiled mainly by the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control. They kind of ran these statistics. This one on fast food is from a place called Datafinity, and I just started flipping through it and found, that fast food joints, mainly in the Midwest, is going to be the highest, is about 4.5 per 10,000 residents, and in the South, it's 4.4 per 10,000 residents. And then when you look up at New England, it's actually the lowest in the country, which is why it kind of, in my opinion, kind of skips over New England, and they're at 2.5 per 10,000 residents. And when you look at the Western U.S., it's 3.7. So you can kind of see a correlation in what the diet is, but if you take that fast food diet and you combine it with a deep fried Southern diet, as well as food scarcity, then you're going to see an increase in all of these diseases.
Right. So yeah, I mean, this is first of all an issue that is, and we'll go into this a bit later, but it's so chronic, but also an issue that should be more at the forefront of our discussion, and is one of those topics that is the least partisan.
Right.
We're not trying to like shame or blame the individual.
No, it's just a reality.
Yeah, we're not trying to say like if you live in this region, you are the problem. Why are you so irresponsible and have no self-control? It's like, no, that it's first of all, like every restaurant you go to was pretty much just this deep fried, something or other. So like you said, you have the fast food, or you go to a more boutique, cooler, hipper, upscale restaurant.
Right.
But it's not that much healthier. I mean, there are a few huge differences, but at least in some other states, like kind of the Western, Northwestern, there are alternatives. There are plenty of alternatives that are on the healthier side.
So the next thing I want to direct your attention to is this Vox article. And it's got about 40 different slides on, various just food facts. But I'll direct you to slide number 18, the first. This is kind of a illustrated map of obesity spreading across the United States by year. And it goes from about 1981 to 2010. And you just see it just kind of rippling across the U.S. And it, at first there's areas where there's not enough data, and then you just see obesity on the rise.
Right.
But one other thing that I wanted to look at, and let me find the chart number, it goes into, it's slide 16. If you look at that slide, it's called food deserts. And if you're not aware, listeners, of what a food desert is, it is a area of the country where residents per capita fewer have a motor vehicle or public transit, and there's not a grocery store within a mile. That's known as a food desert. So if you have to walk to get fresh produce and it's not within a mile and you don't own a vehicle, then you are living in a food desert.
So essentially, I know there seems to be a specific calculation, but I guess in layman's terms, if it's fairly inconvenient.
There's a difficulty that is worked into this.
Right.
And part of that difficulty is poverty, right? Not being able to afford a motor vehicle, and then on top of that, not having a fresh produce market within walking distance.
Yeah, because processed food is cheaper.
Right. And so once again, where do we see that area of the country that has the most food deserts? We're looking at Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, up into Kentucky, West Virginia, and southern Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I can tell you as an economist and avid student of that topic still post-college, this also very, very closely mimics the a map. If I put a map on there of states and per capita of people living below the poverty line.
Right, yeah.
And who in a poor community can afford the avocado toast, as some rail against, or just something healthy.
But I think with this, it's not even so much who can afford it, who even has it within their neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So if you look at this map, again, it's just bizarre that it just jumps over the Northeast and hits the northern part of Maine once again. It's just weird that, the correlation seems to be the same in all of these. If you have a higher abundance of fast food, a lower abundance of fresh produce within walking distance, you have a higher fat and deep fried diet, and then on top of that, you have no motor vehicle. Then you're just going to see a concentration of all of these diet-related illnesses.
Yeah, and that stands out as something, and I'm glad you brought that specific map up, because that further illustrates, like you mentioned, it is not just a matter of, can you afford it? Because even in those counties, people who can afford it are still at a much more significant inconvenience for finding a place with fresh, with healthier food. Like it is a direct accessibility issue. Even if you had a vehicle or some public transport, your options are so limited. Okay, John, so there are a couple things I want to mention. Is first of all, we have these nutrition labels, which is good that it's provided on every product. I think most people would agree that it's good to be there. I should confess that I am in the boat of people who I think I've looked at maybe 10 my entire life, and usually it's the cereal box one when I'm sitting down eating the cereal that's bad for at the breakfast table. But anyway, like there are these helpful guides, but it also doesn't really tell me. It gives me some percentage values, but to me it's a little too generic, just like with BMI. We needed to break it down, and I think, didn't you find something that allows you to see something more specific in terms of your percentage of recommended daily intake?
Yeah, so the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a called a DRI calculator, and that's daily, what is it, something?
Recommended intake?
Yeah, exactly. And so you can put in your age and your weight and your height and, how active you are, through exercise, and, it'll calculate your BMI and then your daily nutritional intakes. So for someone that is my size and weight and height and all of that and age, my carbohydrate recommended intake is 437 grams to 631. And it does things like fiber at 38, protein 73, fat at 86 to 151. And then, there's a vitamin breakdown as well as a mineral breakdown. And the one that I always jump to is sodium, which is 1,500 milligrams. And all of this seems extremely academic, but what the labels on the food does is it kind of does a general guideline as stipulated by the USDA as to what you should just about be hitting. So the first thing you have to look at when you're looking at a nutrition label is, what is the serving size, right? Like what percent of this product or this box or this can should I be consuming to stay within this guideline? And some of them, it's very obvious that, like a serving size is about what you would eat out of that box. But other of them is like, really only 9 chips?
Right.
That's the serving size?
Exactly. And then in the bag, they only give you 8.
Right. So let me give you like one of the bigger misleading ones there is. If you ever pull a can of soup off the shelf and you spin it around, you'll see that the sodium level in it is 600 or 700 milligrams for a 12-ounce can. And then you look at the serving size and you realize that little 12-ounce can is like 3 servings. So that means the sodium content is between 18 and 2,100 milligrams, which exceeds your daily intake by about 600 milligrams. So the more soup you eat, the more sodium you're getting, the higher chance of elevated blood pressure you'll get. So, each one of these metrics that is outlined on the side of these boxes kind of tell you how it'll affect your health. So the primary ones are going to be fat and sugar and then salt. And if you want to know more about this, there's a great book with a very similar title called Salt, Sugar, Fat by Michael Moss. He was the New York Times food correspondent. I say was. He was at the time he wrote this. I don't know if he still is or not. And it's a fantastic book that tells you all about these three ingredients. And the way the processed food manufacturers work is they basically have three levers. And one is salt, one is sugar, one is fat. And they kind of adjust them to get the peak taste out of it. And a guy named Howard Moskowitz was a food engineer. And I know that we would call somebody who prepares food a chef, but in the processed food industry, they're known as food scientists or food engineers.
Okay.
And they are literally that. They are measuring the specific amount of sugar that they should put in to make it so great, so perfect, and so alluring that you'll continue to buy it. And they call that point the bliss point, right? So if you go over the bliss point, it's too sugary. And if you stay under it, it may not be sweet enough.
It's kind of bland almost.
Yeah, and the bliss point is this is where we will generate the most sales. And you can do that with salt, too. Something can be too salty or not enough salt to lose its texture and taste. The one that doesn't have a bliss point is fat. And fat just can go off the radar and you wouldn't know it. And the thing you have to understand about processed food is these things aren't in there naturally. They're adding these things in order to give it taste and allure. That's why they're engineers. They're literally engineering a taste that will make it very attractive and make you keep buying it.
Okay, so that was actually going to be one of my initial questions is, processed versus organic versus, non-GMO versus farm to table versus, all this stuff. Like what specifically, if I had to identify looking at a whole row of cereals or whatever, like how can I easily identify without having to pull out my phone and Google every single cereal? Is there a way I can go, yeah, that's clearly processed? And what defines processed versus, I know you kind of touched on it, if that is the definition, but if we can just clarify, like what is the clear definition between something that is processed or not?
So processed food, essentially, the best description I've ever heard of it is the process of cooking it has been taken out of the equation. It's already done, right? So it requires very little of you to eat it. So you don't have to cook it. You don't have to do all this stuff to it. It's already kind of done for you. So take, for example, pasta sauce.
Okay.
Right? You didn't cut up tomatoes and make that yourself. It's been done for you. And all you have to do is heat it and serve, right?
Wow, so because at first I thought like, oh, it's probably only like cinnamon toast crunch, but you're saying I would have never thought like pasta sauce. Like, come on, it's got tomatoes, it's got some basil. Like,
it also has added sugar and a crap load of sodium.
And so it is when other things are added specifically. And of course they want to
enhance the flavor and taste.
Of course they want to make sure it doesn't taste like crap. That's understandable, and neither of us fault a company for not wanting their product to taste bad. But you're saying the explicit difference is nothing, has been added in terms of like enhancing the flavor or whatever. Like, but some cereals taste sweet, or oatmeal or meals taste sweet because they have berries or whatever fruit in them and stuff, but no added sugar and
no added sodium.
So it's only when it hasn't been, I guess, tampered with. The flavor and the nutritional contents, as soon as it has been tampered with and edited, that's when it goes from being a non-processed to a processed food, correct?
Precisely, yeah. And a better way of explaining it, the one that is most common that you'll see online is it's referred to as bag and box food, right?
Okay.
If it comes in a bag or a box, most likely it's processed. So, your produce section at your local market, that's your unprocessed food because it hasn't been cooked or chopped or anything,
Right.
right? And then everything else will have added sodium, added sugar, added fat to it. And that's where people find that the more processed food you put into your diet, the more health risk you're bringing in as well.
And I mean, there is another difference that I'd like to bring up, and if you agree or disagree, or maybe I'm oversimplifying things here. When you brought up like produce versus other things, I think I have a bag of cereal that has been sitting on top of my fridge for possibly 5, pushing 6 months, and I could take it out tomorrow morning and it would be fine. You can't really do that with an apple
Right.
or a banana, and it seems like that is one either indicator or one issue why cost might be higher and certain people can't get it, or certain reason why some companies would want to process their food is it's certainly more effective, and you can keep a cereal on the shelf as long as it needs to be there.
Right.
Cinnamon Toast Crunch never needs to be taken down and thrown away because it's gone bad and people didn't buy it. After like a few days, they got to take the apples out and toss them because whatever people haven't bought. So it's not efficient for the stores as much, or
There's a higher cost associated with food waste.
yeah, food waste. It's not as efficient for manufacturing. It's not as efficient cost-wise for the store. At least I understand why someone would reach for a processed thing. It seems like everything I can think of, it's like the more processed it is, the cheaper. Like you can get the garbage food.
You just tapped into the number one reason processed food exists. And it's not, the cost. It is the convenience, right? What can I feed my kids that I know they'll eat, that's cheap, that I can get them out the door and do it quickly?
Right.
And an entire industry started because of that. We're busy. We got stuff to do, places to go. Everyone's active. I just need to throw something at them that doesn't take me 37 minutes to cook. I need to put 2 ingredients together, add water, and I'm done. And what they have found is that when you make something at home from scratch, not only does it not take that much longer to do, it actually tastes better and more people will eat it. They've found this in study after study. But the convenience factor of processed food and convenience food kind of outweighs the time factor. So people don't want to spend all this time preparing it. That's why they've increased the amount of processed food they've eaten.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of, as a child of the 90s, late 80s, and throughout the 90s, I remember I am 95% sure it was specifically for Pop-Tarts. A commercial where it showed these 2 kids getting ready, at like 8 years old, 9 years old, in the morning, and they're hurrying, getting ready for school, being rambunctious, and then when they're running out the door, they're like, "Bye, Mom, going to school," and she'd say, "Wait, but you needed to eat your," and then she turned around and said, "Breakfast," and it showed this beautiful breakfast, like, perfect eggs and toast, and the healthiest thing, but it showed the kitchen was a mess and she slaved over this food, and then the kids didn't even eat it and she has hours of cleaning ahead of her, and then it suddenly showed the same situation. "Mom, going to school," and she said, "Wait," and then in this scenario they stopped as if like that. Right. When I was a kid, I would have stopped if I smelled pancakes. But she just hit a button. The Pop-Tarts popped out of the toaster and she said, don't forget your breakfast. And there was no mess. There was no, but, clearly there is a health difference. But it really highlighted it definitely exaggerated. Like it looked like she made breakfast for an entire community. Like the kitchen was a disaster, and it really went to this whole, like, you're a busy mom. Like you shouldn't have to keep doing it, as if anyone really makes that big of a mess. But it really hit that point that you mentioned. It is the convenience.
So in the 1970s, everyone started talking about fat. We got to reduce fat in the diet, got to get rid of fat, right? And so there was this concentrated effort on reducing fat. So take, for example, the dairy industry's response. What they did was they started labeling their milk 2%.
Right.
Okay, now here's what you have to understand, and this is actual brilliant marketing strategy. The milk that comes out of a cow's udder is 3%. So all they did was label it 2%, which gives you the idea that 98% of the fat has been removed, when that is not the fact. A third of it's been removed, right? And what do they do with that third that's been removed? They make cheese out of it.
Yeah, a third has been removed, and even then it's just 3% of it. If it's whole
straight
milk,
out of the udder, it's 3%.
So straight out, it's not like it's 96% fat. It's still like just 3%. That's not terrible. So 2% does make it seem, kind of like you mentioned, this drastic difference.
Another example is right after that, these advocates for reducing sugar in cereal. One was a dentist who he went back and he started reviewing how much sugar they put in cereal. And he bought every cereal on the market, and he took it home and he started measuring with precise accuracy what percent of the cereal was sugar. Now, it's critical to point out not what percent of your daily intake,
okay,
but what percent of the cereal is sugar. And on average, it was between 20 and 30% of the cereal. So the higher ones got up to 50%, and the highest one he tested was at 70.8% sugar. Yeah.
Did they mention which one it was? Like, is it still for sale today?
Like Sugar Orange Crisp or something. So it's not a cereal that's around anymore. So what he and this consumer advocate were pressing the FTC for was, we need to stop marketing this to children.
Right.
Okay, these cereals are being marketed directly to children during cartoon time. If it has 70% sugar, that's not cereal. That is
candy.
That's candy, so it should be in a candy aisle.
It's almost like, I bet you there are a lot of things like Milano cookies that are in the candy aisle that probably have less percent, fewer percent of it is sugar.
Right.
And that was the other thing, you just brought up that I was going to bring up that I kind of noticed, not when I was a kid, more when I got a little older, in my, when I was more in my 20s, going into my 30s, was, like you think about that Pop-Tart commercial I brought up. Who's that advertised for? The mom. Like, it's not, the kid's being a kid. And it's telling moms, hey, this is going to make your life easier. So, of course, they went into it. But then there was a very significant shift. So we went from advertising food to, parents, all of a sudden to silly rabbit, tricks are for kids. If they were marketed to an adult, they probably wouldn't have these, fun colors and these cute, like you said, cartoons, these cute little cartoon characters on it. They would look a lot more like the kind of boring, organic, very well labeled. If you're a child, you probably can't reach the top shelf. Yeah. in a supermarket, but you can reach like the bottom 2, maybe the bottom
Oh
3
yeah, it's all
shelves.
very well planned
So-
out, and that space on those shelves is fought over by
Right.
these handful of cereal producers.
So I thought it's, parents have an even harder time when their kids are coming up to them with something in their hand saying, "But mommy, please." They'll be like, sure, if that's what you want. There is a reason, a very specific psychological research-based reason why you don't see the kids' cereals, higher up. As you go higher and higher, that's when you get the more healthy, less processed, more, I guess, adult-driven cereals.
Yeah. And what happened was the two advocates I was talking about earlier, they started kind of a movement. And the movement was, hey, you're focused on fat. You need to be focused on sugar, right? And they were telling the government this. And the point was made by a different advocacy group that mailed with their petition to the FTC 12,000 children's teeth, all of which were cavity-ridden. And they said, you need to deal with this, right? There's way too much sugar. So again, going back to the marketing gimmick, Kellogg's heard this and said, well, we're not changing our formula because that hurts our sales. The second you take 1 grain of sugar out of this, people won't buy it. And they did studies on that and could test that. And, they would say, well, we shouldn't take sugar out because that's just screwing with the formula. So what they did was they took the word sugar out. So it went from sugar frosted flakes to frosted flakes, right? And they have spent millions to ensure that the consumer looks at fat instead of sugar, right? Because if it's fat has always had a bad rep,
Right.
right? The word fat is an ugly word. Whereas sugar is always associated with sweetness and innocence and,
Right.
oh, she's got a bit of a sweet tooth, right?
Right.
But once they started focusing on sugar, man, there was a backlash. And there was, the industry came out full throttle in preventing sugar being pulled out. And what I want to look at is as this fight was going on, up until a certain point, the argument was, well, these cereals shouldn't be marketed to children, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then eventually the outcry was nothing should be marketed to children because children aren't buying it. Their parents are, and their parents should be informed, and their parents should make the decision as to what to put in the shopping cart, not the kids, right, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And that was too much for the editorial board at the Washington Post. And I just want to read a couple paragraphs out of Salt, Sugar, Fat to kind of clarify that point. So this part is from a chapter called, Is It Cereal or Candy?
Okay.
Until then, the editorial board of the Washington Post had supported the commission's work in general, portraying it as necessary to balance the power of private industry. But in this matter of children's advertising, the paper turned fiercely against the FTC with an editorial whose headline labeled it the National Nanny. Getting children to eat less sugar may be a laudable goal, the Post said, practically regurgitating the industry line that regulatory intervention was uncalled for. Quote, but what are the children to be protected from? The candy and sugar-coated cereals that lead to tooth decay, or the inability or refusal of the parents to say no? The food products will still be there sitting on the shelves of the local supermarkets, after all, no matter what happens to the commercials. So the proposal, in reality, is designed to protect children from the weakness of the parents, and the parents from the wailing insistence of their children. That traditionally is the role of a governess, if you can afford one. It's not the proper role of government. So this is quite literally where the idea of government is the nanny state came from, was the processed food industry pushing back against regulators, and then the Washington Post finally joining their side and making their case for them.
Yeah, and anyone who thinks like, okay, they're showing an ad during commercial, they're not like advertising to the kids per se. Like, no. If you think about the commercials, a lot of them were a child running up to their mother, and specifically their mother, because they know that even today, before it used to be even higher percentage, but even today, over 70% of household purchases, whether it be school supplies, clothes for the kid, or most often groceries, are made by mom. Right. And so that's why they never run up to dad, but they run up to mom. Please, may I? Can I? So they are literally telling kids, like, this is how you have it. This is how you get it. Run up to mom, not dad. Like, you don't see the kids running up. You see them going up and begging. That clearly is not an ad designed for the parents. And also, if that wasn't the case, fine. Let's start putting some Bacardi commercials and Captain Morgan commercials on Saturday morning cartoons. Right. But you say that's inappropriate because, alcohol and liver disease and all these things. Yeah, we also showed a correlation between this and obesity. Yeah, and everything. So this is also terribly unhealthy. You think getting diabetes is pleasant, or, a lot of these are actually, compared to some of the diseases that are caused by like alcohol, it's like they either are a much slower more painful death, or just a sudden death, right. And so they're terrible for you. If you weren't okay with, and yes, I know like a child can't drink whatever, but a child can eat this stuff, but it's like most people would be morally opposed to an ad for Bacardi or Captain Morgan or Bud Light, during cartoon. Understandable. Like, I agree with you if you think that is probably not appropriate.
But the difference is there is a regulation in place for that.
Exactly. And, so if someone says, oh, that'd be wrong, guess what? I agree. Like, that shouldn't be. And, there are regulations that are...
So imagine using your scenario, right? We start advertising Jack Daniels to children during Saturday morning cartoons, right? And you go to the supermarket, and the kid runs over, grabs a bottle of Jack Daniels, and puts it in the supermarket, the trolley, whatever it's called, cart. Yeah. So we say, oh, well, no, there's a regulation in place. You have to be 21 years of age or older to consume that. But if it's a sugary substance and they're putting it in there, we say, oh, that's on the parents.
Right.
The alcohol isn't, right? That's on the government. Government's allowed to regulate that.
And cigarettes.
Cigarettes and, but the sugar, that's the parents' fault. Oh, that's up to personal responsibility that, these people are making these decisions, and it's negatively impacting them and their family. They should be, more careful about what they consume. And that's just BS.
Yeah, exactly. And, there is a long history, like, of course, and there is nothing generally bad about, like, of course a product isn't going to show any downsides to it or weaknesses in advertising, marketing. Right. Nobody's gonna, Ford didn't run ads when they had that rollover problem with the Explorer. Like, look at how easily this rolls over and could possibly kill your family. Like, of course they're gonna show the nice stuff, the good stuff, whatever.
Yeah,
but
if cigarettes had vitamin C in it, you can bet the tobacco companies would only focus on that. Did you smoke your cigarettes today? You've been listening to It Might Be Interesting. Please join us next time.
And we'd love to hear any thoughts, questions, feedback, and even episode suggestions you might have. So if you do have any, please send it over to thoughts@itmightbeinteresting.com. And you can also check out our other episodes at itmightbeinteresting.com.
Right? It's all about marketing to busy lives and busy moms, and you don't have time for this, and the kids won't eat it anyway.